Our guest today, Emanuel Pastreich, is a professor of East Asian literature at Kyung Hee University, Humanitas College. Widely known as the acclaimed author of Life is a Matter of Direction, Not Speed, and the director of the research-based think tank Asia Institute, Pastreich has and continues to play a key role in promoting Korean studies both at home and abroad. Stay tuned to Seoul Report with Yuri Kim.
Professor Emanuel Pastreich, thanks for joining us on Seoul Report today. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yes, you are now a well-established scholar of Asian literature and a critic of Korean contemporary issues. I'm really curious, what was it that first compelled you to study Asian literature?
So in the beginning, I didn't start with Korea, but rather with China. And at the time, actually, all the way back in high school, I went to a high school in San Francisco. We had a large number of Asian students there. And so that's when I became sort of aware of Asian culture. And it actually became very accustomed to being often the only Caucasian in the room. So I feel very comfortable in Asia. And then when I started college, I had this sense that Asia was going to be the future. And I started teaching myself a little bit of Chinese, and fell in love, I think, mainly with the Chinese characters at first, and then moved on to learn about Japan and then Korea.
Do you remember your first visit to Korea?
So I remember quite vividly.
Okay.
I actually, my roommate, classmate from Yale, married, he's a Korean American, and married a Korean back in 1992, and I came for his wedding.
Really?
I had never been to Korea before, and it was actually fascinating for me.
So what was your first impression of Korea like, if you remember?
So this was in 1992,
right.
and I was living in Japan. I had been there for several years.
For your master's?
Oh, so I was working my master's, exactly.
Right.
And so when I arrived in Korea, on the one hand, it seemed a little bit less organized than Japan, and a little bit less neat. On the other hand, I found the people to be extremely easy to talk to in a way. I found that whereas Japanese tend to be more polite, when Koreans said something to you, not in every case, but in certain cases, there was a certain sort of an affection in the way that they spoke, which I felt very at home with.
Right. And so over the years, you've been here for about 10 years.
Total amount of time is maybe not 10 years. It's more like seven years total.
And during that time, you've obviously made Korea your home now, and you've mastered the Korean language. You're very good at it. How did you learn Korean?
So I wouldn't say I've totally mastered it, but I have made a little bit of progress. One advantage is, of course, that I had studied Chinese and Japanese for many years before, but maybe more importantly, it was just an incredibly high priority for me. I made myself read Korean newspapers every day for long periods of time. I used to do things like, for example, KBS on the Tashipogi, right? See it again online. So I would read the text for the broadcast through 3 or 4 times, and then listen to it like 10 times until I could follow essentially every word. And I would practice like that to improve my Korean.
Wow. That's amazing. Do you remember your first exposure to Korean literature then?
So I started working in this comparative Asian literature, and it was China and Japan that I was comparing. Along the way, it became clear that I needed to know something about this country, Korea, there in the middle. And I started working on novels, basically novels written in Chinese by Koreans from the 17th, 18th century. And I was very much taken with some of the short stories that I read from that period, and in fact I went on to translate some of them into English.
Right. And so right now you are currently teaching at Kyung Hee University, Humanitas College, which I believe is a very prestigious liberal arts program at Kyung Hee.
So
is it right? It's a liberal arts program.
So Humanitas is a new project of Kyung Hee University to start a new undergraduate program in which all undergraduates would have exposure to the liberal arts, philosophy, literature, history, and also quite a bit in terms of natural sciences as part of their required courses, including and also writing and a civics education class.
So it is a very much of a well-rounded
exactly.
education that students are getting.
Exactly.
And you're currently teaching Korean literature, but I understand that you spent many years researching and teaching Chinese and Japanese literature, as you mentioned. And
right.
What was it about the Korean literature tradition that compelled you to study it?
So, again, it started from a comparative perspective. I wanted to look at the novels is what I was working on, of, say, 17th, 18th century. And most people, traditionally, we tend to look at either China or Japan or Korea. But I wanted to see what was going on in a contemporary setting, to say what were 18th century writers doing in China, Japan, and Korea, and how might it have been related. In the case of Korea, I was very taken by the novels, for example, of Yeonang Park Ji-won, the novelist, and I thought they were quite remarkable and unlike anything I had seen really in China and in Japan. So it tempted me to learn more. And I also looked at a variety of not just Chunhyang, Tale of Chunhyang, but other Korean novels from the 17th, 18th century as well.
So you studied in the U.S., Taiwan, and in Japan, as you talked about. What compelled you to come to Korea, and what makes you want to study Korean literature here?
So, well, if you're going to study Korean literature, you have to study it in Korea. And this is an important point, because some fields, say, for example, Chinese literature, they have a long tradition in the United States, 100 years of studying Chinese literature. So there is a sort of an American approach to Chinese literature, and there is a certain legitimacy to wanting to study Chinese literature in the United States. But in the case of Korean literature, there are so few scholars, and it's so recent in the United States, that I really think you have to be here to really understand and learn.
Right. And as you mentioned, you are very interested in Korean classical literature, and you translated, I believe, 10 short stories written by Park Ji-won,
correct,
a noted writer from the Joseon period. And this book came out last year. What do you think is the importance of reading classical literature in this day and age, when we're like bombarded with so many contemporary works to read? Right.
So there are several levels to it, and I'll say it from the point of view of, say, a non-Korean, a international reader. The first is, of course, that Korean culture has multiple layers to it and has a tremendous depth to it. So although it's wonderful that people all over the world have taken an interest in Gangnam Style and popular culture, there is more. There's a tremendous depth and profundity to the philosophy and literary writings in Korea. And so I really wanted to introduce something of that tradition abroad, to give some sense of Korea, not just as a country which suddenly came into being in the last 10 years, but one that goes back thousands of years and has its own distinct contributions to the literary tradition of the world. That as we go forward, that there's a real need to introduce the past, the great tradition of Korea. Because what compels people, say, in other countries, say, if you look at France or Germany or Italy or Japan, that it's that depth, that cultural depth going back, which gives the tradition real authority.
So you've studied and taught in the States for many years, and you've been very active in promoting Asian studies and especially Korean studies in the United States. Why is this issue so critical to you?
So in the case of the United States, there have been tremendous shifts. I mean, United States, in terms of trade and economic relations, actually is much more closely tied to Asia now, really, than any other region. However, if you go to American universities, for example, number of professors teaching, say, French, it would be like, 20. Number of teaching Chinese would be like 3, and Korean, maybe somebody, maybe not. So that sort of scholarly intellectual understanding of Asia is quite limited, but the economic, technological, trade engagement with Asia is actually greater than it is with Europe. So I really felt that this was a serious issue that we really needed, as this is from the American perspective, really needed to understand Asia because we are so deeply tied to Asia today.
Right. And why is it that, I remember reading some article about this, researchers in the United States who study Korean studies, they read mostly texts written in Japanese to study Korea's culture, civilization, and history. Why is it that people are still studying Korea based on Japanese texts? Right.
So I wouldn't say that, well, not all scholarship in Japanese is bad, and there is some good scholarship on Korea in Japanese. That said, traditionally, Korea was introduced through Japanese sources, and it did have, it had a, because basically Japanese controlled the research system in Asia for many, many years, and they had a certain agenda in terms of how they, at that time, and how they presented Korea. There was a tendency to focus on very late Chosun period, sort of decadent, ineffective Korean governance, and they emphasized what was wrong with Korea. And the reason they emphasized this was because they wanted to sort of show that somehow the Japanese had saved Korea from from its decay. But that was not entirely an accurate description, and it ignored, say, with the Chosun period, long periods when Chosun was probably the best administered country in Asia, maybe in the world. It's actually, it went on for 500 years, which I think among countries since, I mean, in the Egyptian times, there were empires that went for long periods of time. But in recent days, I think Korea is the only country which was able to maintain a peaceful administration successfully for so long. China was unable to do that. Japan was unable to do that. So there's something quite impressive about what Korea achieved, but the Japanese wanted to sort of downplay that.
Right. So it is certainly a concern for many scholars.
Oh, it's less of an issue now than it was, say, 30 years ago. But people are indirectly influenced by this tradition. Including, of course, Korean scholars. There are many Korean scholars who have also, there's a sort of an assumption that the Chosun period was bad. We became modern, and now we've thrown away, all the bad things about the Chosun period. And so people play along with that, I think, not fully aware that there's something of a sort of an ideological spin in that assumption, which dates back to the Japanese colonial policies.
So your original research field is in the comparative Asian studies, but I understand that you also write extensively on technology and society and Korean contemporary issues as part of your work with the Asia Institute, which you founded. Can you tell us about your organization?
So I have not, it is related, of course, to my work in the humanities, but we felt very strongly that with technology developing so quickly, there was a real need to look at the sort of intersection between technology, the environment, which is, of course, immediately impacted by technology, and also international relations, how countries relate to each other, which is also being very much impacted by both environment and technology. So this is a topic which most research institutes have not treated seriously, and particularly in Korea, because Korea is now, in a way, the center of the world. We really wanted to have a research institute that addressed these issues. Not just to talk about trade and six-party talks, but to talk about issues of like how technology, how the environment is changing our lives, and how we relate to each other.
So this is more like a pan-Asian think tank.
That's
then.
correct. It's in Korea, and most people involved are Koreans, but it isn't inherently a Korean institution. We really want. I'm not Korean. I mean, although I feel pretty Korean, but we try and look at Asia as a whole. And I think that Korea is in some ways the best place for it. Korea is a country in Asia which has great economic and cultural vitality, but it doesn't have the sort of imperialistic traditions that one sees in, say, China and Japan, which often interfere with the full potential that those countries have. So because Korea may be smaller, but it's more balanced in a way, it has been able to serve a very, very important role in Asia.
Exactly. You're best known probably as the author of an acclaimed book titled 인생은 속도가 아니라 방향이다, or Life is not a matter of speed or but direction.
Correct.
In which you stress the importance of the humanities. What is it that you wanted your readers to take away from this wonderful book that you wrote?
So I thought, I guess it came out of, the book came in some ways out of the Asia Institute work on technology, and somewhat by accident I ended up in Daejeon teaching, and I worked with the Daedok Research Cluster on several projects. And so technology is really transforming our world at every level, as I'm sure you're aware, as we can see right now as we're broadcast by cameras. And this is something truly new. And this is transforming our world. So you might think is that as technology becomes more important or changes more rapidly, maybe we should all become electrical engineers. But in fact, it's the opposite. What we really need to do is we have to think about issues like literature, which is how you express yourself effectively, how you understand what other people say or what something means, art, how images speak to us through technology, philosophy, questions of how do you know what's real, because of course technology makes it much more complicated to figure out what's accurate, what's real, what's significant. So I argued in the book that, and as well I tried to give some of my views about the enormous potential that Korea has, and some thoughts as a foreigner, as somebody living here, about how Korea could become a sort of truly international country and could set a sort of a model for the world.
I know that this book has received really positive response from its readers. I was one of them. I've read your book.
You did? Oh, well, thank you.
Yes, and by speed, I meant, I thought you meant that you were referring to Korea's the speed of modernity.
Right, right.
In its compressed modernity,
very much
as some
true.
scholars say, and the sheer speed of the transformation that Korea has gone through.
Right.
But direction, by that I felt like you meant the humanities.
Right.
The need for us to study it.
Right. So that there has been, as you know, the quick body culture of Korea, in which the speed with which you can do something becomes the driving metaphor for everything in life. And the danger of that, it has positives to it. I wouldn't say we have to recognize how it's helped that perspective, but in a way it ties our daily life to the progression of technology and production in a way, and that can cripple our ability to conceive of where we are and where we want to go, in a way to lose the long-term goal for the day-to-day process of doing things quickly. And I think if I had this, I don't know Korea so well, and I'm still learning, but if there's one thing I thought I could maybe help was to sort of draw attention to this point.
It's a very good comment that you're making. And, you know, Korea is fast becoming a global, multicultural, multi-ethnic society. The number of foreigners are increasing day by day. But has Korea, in your opinion, become a global society in its truest sense, do you think? So
there are no... Let's say that a truly global society is asymptotic. No country has ever gotten there and will probably never ever will. So it's an ideal. if we look across the map in the world, certain countries have achieved that goal in different respects. Korea is maybe one of the more complex examples. On the one hand, there's a very strong ethnic ideology or mentality that ties Koreans to the other, to think we are one people and we're distinctly Korean and different from foreigners. On the other hand, Korea is the most global society in the world. You can anywhere you go in Central Asia or Africa or South America, you will find Koreans. You usually find Koreans or Chinese and maybe a couple Indians, but there are how many 20 times as many Chinese in the world. So the number of Koreans, the fact that you find Koreans everywhere is truly remarkable. So it is a truly global society, and now with some challenges in terms of the aging society, the fact that many women do not have children has resulted in a very large number of people from all over the world coming into Korea, both the regional level and also in cities. And I think Korea is, it's been overall positive. Overall, I think Korea, I've given several lectures related to sort of multi-cultural education, and Korea has made an effort. However, I wouldn't say it's perfect. I think there are many foreign students who don't feel that they're able to make Korean friends so easily, and we have had a lot of trouble with multicultural families in which there's a certain degree of alienation, both for often the wives from other countries and from the children as well. And it's going to be a very serious issue we have to focus on.
Right, so there's this great sense. And speaking of Korean culture, you have a new book out.
Just
out. 세계의 석학들 한국의 미래를 말하다, or experts of the world speak out about Korea's future. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
So this is really a truly original book. I was asked to write a book in which we interviewed experts from around the world, and really the most prominent figures. We have Francis Fukuyama, Noam Chomsky, Benjamin Barber, Larry Wilkerson, and others. And we asked them not their sort of general opinions about the world, but very specifically about issues in Korea, about Koreans' issues in social welfare, trade, politics, education, and a broad spectrum of other issues. And we explained to them, I explained to them in English about the issues in Korea, and they gave their opinions. And we learned along the way that so many of the issues that Koreans that we think of as being very uniquely Korean problems are linked to global issues, and that countries like the United States or Germany or Japan or other countries, we interviewed people from around the world, there are variations. There are variations, but they also encounter similar issues, and there's quite a lot that we can learn to get a better perspective on the issues that we face today in Korea.
It sounds like a very interesting read, and I should definitely check it out. And our listeners who are interested, hopefully they can grab a copy of it and read it. Well, last but not least, time is running out, it seems like. If people want to learn more about your work, Professor Pastreich, where can they go? Do you have a blog or the website of your Asia Institute?
So I would say I have a blog called circlesandSquares.asia.
circlesandSquares.asia.
And that has basically everything. We have the Asia Institute website as well, asia-institute.org. And either place will give you much of what we're writing. We have seminars frequently, and I hope some of our listeners will come.
Yes. Please do check out Professor Pastreich's blog and the website. Well, Professor Pastreich, thank you so much for speaking to KBS World Radio today. We really appreciated you, and thank you for sharing your insights and experiences in Korean literature and Asian studies in general. That does it for today's edition of Seoul Report. Thank you for joining Seoul Report today. Thank you to Professor Pastreich for joining us. I'll be back next time. Goodbye, everyone.